Then I saw 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. And another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer. He was given much incense to mingle with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar before the throne. And we mentioned that this is the heavenly altar of incense that was also in the tabernacle. Remember that? The golden altar of incense, that's before you get into the Holy of Holies, which is where the Ark of the Covenant was. Okay? So this is a reflection of what you would see in the temple. All right? Then this smoke of incense rose with the prayers of the saints in the hand of the angel before God. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there were peals of thunder, loud noises, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. Then the 7 angels began to sound. I think it's important that you see this transition. This is what I was getting at from the beginning. I think before we went off on that tangent. Is the idea that while you're in heaven, this same censer brings the prayers of the saints like incense before God. You notice that? But that same censer, when filled with the coals, is thrown to the earth, what does it look like? Thunder, lightning, earthquakes, all of these plagues. You see, the same thing that is good for those in heaven brings disasters on the earth. That's the contrast that I was trying to get at with this new covenant idea. Those who are in the new covenant will experience the same event as a blessing from God, and those outside of the covenant will see it as some sort of blight. Does that make sense? So the idea, and it's just like in the Old Testament, it's where the curses for not following the law and the blessings for following the law. Okay? It's that idea, except it's amped up. Because now we're talking about our soul, not our bodies. Good? All right. So, we went through, now the rest of chapter 8 are the first 4 trumpets. I want to make sure I have enough time. So the first thing we need to know is, why trumpets? That's an answer to the first question. Why trumpets? What's the significance of trumpets? And if you have your outline, you will see that under capital B, lowercase b, the trumpet judgments 1 through 4, verses 6 through 14. I have a few more left. Does anyone need an outline? Okay. I think yes. Pass these back. Thank you. Now, as you can see, there are 2 main functions trumpets are used for. Even without filling anything, what are the 2 uses of trumpets in the Old Testament? Worship and war. Now, we've been here before already, right? With the number 24. 24 is a symbolic number. Remember what it was used for? Worship and war. Because the Levitical priests were divided into groups of 24. Elders. That was in the Old Testament temple. And when David commissioned his armies, he did it in groups of 24,000 men. So both worship and war come from the number 24. And we saw that with the 24 elders around the throne of God. Well, here it is again. Trumpets. You get this sense that all the way through the book of Revelation, he's repeating himself, using different images in order to get the same idea through. Okay? So, let me go through these fairly quickly, and then we can kind of deconstruct them. Let me see if I can get through at least the first one. How about this? What if I just wrote all of the scriptures and picked select ones, and that way you can go back and read those for the sake of time. Does that sound good? Yeah. Okay. So for worship, the first one we have, and I know we did some of these 2 weeks ago, so some of you may already have them, some of you may not. Exodus 19, 13, and following. The two F's mean just keep reading throughout the rest of the chapter. Leviticus 23, 23 through 25. This is the Feast of Trumpets. A feast was dedicated in the whole Old Testament to the use of trumpets. Okay, so it was part of worship. The book of Numbers 10, the whole chapter. Read the whole chapter, Numbers 10. This is the one that we're going to go to look at. Okay? 2 Chronicles 5, 11 through 13. Ezra 3, 10. Isaiah 27, 13. And Joel 2, 1 and 15. Okay? So those are all the Old Testament references that I would encourage you to look at to see how the use of trumpets were used for worship. And the one I want to focus on is Numbers 10. Book of Numbers, chapter 10.
What page?
105.
Mm-hmm.
105?
Page 105, if you have my Bible. Okay. Numbers chapter 10, verses, I'm going to read basically 1 through 3. The Lord said to Moses, "Make 2 silver trumpets. Of hammered wood you shall make them, and you shall use them for summoning the congregation, and for breaking camp. And when both are blown, all the congregation shall gather themselves to you at the entrance of the tent of meeting." What's the tent of meeting?
Tabernacle.
The tabernacle, yes. That's another word for the tabernacle. This is the tent of meeting. All of Israel's worship centered around the tabernacle when they were in the wilderness, and later the temple. So during the Feast of Trumpets, you were to gather into the temple. Okay? It was a call to summon you to worship. It's time to worship. When you hear these trumpets sound, it's time to worship. Okay? And then the rest of this chapter talks about the various uses of that. Let me just read one more. Let's go to Ezra 3. Book of Ezra. Ezra 3, page 347. Actually, 348. Chapter 3, we're looking at verse 10. Remember, Ezra was one of the leaders coming back out of exile to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple and the city. Okay? So here in Ezra we read, "And when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord," right? "The priests in their vestments came forward with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals to praise the Lord according to the directions of David the king of Israel. And they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, for he is good, and his mercy endures forever towards Israel. On and on. What you're basically hearing is a worship service. They're building the temple again that had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar 70 years ago. And they're laying the first stones, and what do? They have a worship service. And how do they do it? With trumpets. Primarily. You see that? So these are just two. These are other verses that you can look at to see the use of trumpets for worship in the Old Testament. Okay? Now, let's go to war. Let's go to war. So this is for war. And again, I'm going to put them up on here, and then I may emphasize a few, and then I trust for you to go through on your own. So the first one is Joshua chapter 6. What happened then? Jericho. The trumpets were blown, and what happened? The walls came down. So the trumpets were used for war. Okay? Then you have Judges 6 through 7, Nehemiah 4, 18 through 20, Jeremiah 4, verse 5, 19, 21, Zechariah 9, 14, 1 Maccabees 3, 53 through 55, and then chapter 4, verse 12, and if you want some background, read verses 5 through 7. Okay? Actually, the book of Maccabees has a lot of trumpet use. I just emphasized 2 parts. Judges, this is when Gideon defeated the Midianites. He blew trumpets to sound confusion in the camp of the Midianites. Nehemiah, this is when those enemies of the Lord were preventing the children of Israel from rebuilding the walls around the city. Nehemiah sounded a trumpet to pick up arms. When they rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem, they had a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other. That's how they rebuilt the walls. So they were laying bricks, and then when an enemy came up, sword, fight. That's how they rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. By laying bricks and by fighting off enemies. And how was it done? Someone was on guard, watching, and they sounded the trumpet. Okay? Jeremiah, Zechariah, and Maccabees. Maccabees is also when they were defeating the, rising up against the Greeks. They were blowing trumpets as a call to the alarm. All right? So these are the uses of trumpets in the Old Testament. So when we look in the book of Revelation and we see these trumpets being used, what do we think is happening? War and worship. Just like we saw they had 24 elders around the throne. See that? It's all about war and worship. And I would argue that worship is warfare. To engage in worship, you're doing war.
Spiritual.
Against the devil, exactly. This is why I would say you should pray and ask the angel that's in charge of the parish here to keep everyone safe. Keep everyone in God's holy covenant. You know, the angel that's in charge of our church, just like the ones that were in charge in the book of Revelation, chapter 2 and 3. Remember those? The angel of the church of Philadelphia, right? Smyrna, Laodicea, Ephesus. There's an angel in charge of the church of St. Charles of North Hollywood. And I would say his goal, his charge, what he's supposed to do is to guard and protect and to keep everyone in the faith. Ask him to pray for those that have fallen away, they're not here, etc. You see what I mean? Because every time you walk into Mass in a state of grace, you are committing an act of war against the United States? No, against whom?
The devil.
The devil. We are in a spiritual warfare, my brothers and sisters, and this is really going to be accented in chapter 12. It's really going to be accented. The more you are faithful and fully participating in the Mass, the more warfare damage you are doing to the kingdom of the evil one. And do you think he sits by and just let it happen?
No.
No. I remember when, those of you who are in the young adult group, you remember when Father Chan, before adoration, went into the church and prayed that prayer of exorcism? Remember that?
Yes.
I remember after our Thursday night Bible study, we walked in and I heard him saying this litany, and I was like, holy smoke, what's going on? You know? And what he was doing was praying the general prayer of minor exorcism. Why? I understand that at that time, and correct me if I'm wrong, those of you who were there, that was the theme of the night for the young adult group.
Yeah.
And so I remember telling Eric Masick, I said, you watch. And I would say, be on guard. I said, the devil does not take that kind of thing lightly. You watch yourself. People are going to come back and say, my car wouldn't start. I was almost in an accident. My mother got hit with something. I got sick this weekend. Watch. And I said, if things like that don't happen, then watch how your relationships start to get rocky. Because if the devil can't reach you personally, he'll reach outside of you and cause all this drama out here to try and rattle you.